Have you ever wondered what reviewers actually mean when they ask you to build on past scholarship? Have you ever been told that your tone is antagonistic or belligerent? Hey, co-authors. In this episode, we're unpacking what it really means to engage with prior research in ways that reviewers recognize as credible, thoughtful, and genuinely contributory. We move beyond the idea that good writing has only one style or tone, and instead focus on how you can better position your work through your prose. So let's dive in. In the first semester of my doctoral program, I was taking an Introduction to Graduate Studies course, sort of the course that most, if not all of us take, in our first semesters, introduction to the department and its culture. Maybe you get some visits from some of the faculty in the department to let you know who's there and what they're studying, and to introduce you to the ideas and the things that you might be doing over the course of your program, and that culminate ultimately into your dissertation project. So in that semester, it was taught by a guy, he's now retired, named Ron Pelias. And at the end of the semester, he assigns us a 20-page prospectus paper. Like, what would you want your dissertation to be on? Why would you want it to be that? And how do you see the next 4 years of your program sort of helping you develop this project? That way, whenever we got to our dissertation phase, hopefully we would have some idea about what we were trying to do. So I write mine, and at the time, I was really interested in this idea of politeness and civility and decorum and etiquette. And so I'm writing this piece about how, all this past scholarship on it is just, it's wrong. It doesn't account for this. It doesn't account for that. It's not good because of this. It's not good because of that. And really just kind of lay out what I perceive to be as the one true path to studying this thing. And I'll never forget, at the end of the semester, I get the paper back. Ron has written on the paper, A for the paper, well done. You obviously have a command of the literature, very well written. I just feel bad that you felt the need to step over so many dead bodies of previous scholars in order for you to make your arguments. Ouch, man. But it's true. There's so many ways that you can write about other people, living or dead, that you're engaging in your scholarship. And Ron was probably right that I was perhaps a little bit acerbic and a little bit holier than thou in the way that I was coming across in my writing. And as a result, it didn't really do a good job of showcasing how I was entering into the conversation with these past scholars, but instead positioned myself as the Promethean firebringer, while everyone else was a bunch of knuckle-dragging idiots who needed me to enlighten them. And so what I want to talk about today are different styles of writing as you're making your arguments. If you're doing more social, naturalistic science, this will be much more prominent, I think, in your literature review and introduction. And if you're doing more humanistic types of scholarship, this will be something that's important for you throughout the entire document. And that is to say, how you're situating others' arguments, findings, and then how you're positioning yourself vis-a-vis those past conversations in terms of the tone of your writing is going to be incredibly important. So that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about how to build on other people's scholarship. So let's dive in. Are you interested in mastering scholarly writing, developing productivity, and increasing impact, all while staying healthy? Then welcome to the Publishing Academic Research Podcast. My name is Dr. Kyle Ruddick, and I'm a full professor and writing coach who's dedicated to making sure you break through whatever is stopping you from reaching your scholarly goals. I meet so many scholars who have creative, innovative, and daring ideas, but can never seem to get those projects from proposals to print. I want you to get your work in the hands of people who will read it and appreciate it. So let's get into this week's big idea. So before I get into the 5 different ways that you can engage with other people's writing, I want to just say overall how important it is for you to get this right. The most egregious example, my story, right, is that you come off as being kind of a pompous know-it-all. And that's really going to be off-putting to most of your readers, especially if those readers of your work are the people that you're citing. Like if you write a bunch of nasty stuff about someone else's work, and they're either your reviewer or they're an author who publishes in that journal and reads that journal, you're going to start finding that you're getting pushback because the way that you're engaging with that conversation, the way that you're engaging with those other scholars is not one that is conducive to this idea of an ongoing conversation. And that's not to say that if someone does something wrong, the way that they've analyzed their data is incorrect, or they've left out important steps of their experimental design, or they've made really bad faith arguments in their text. If that's the case, obviously you should be pointing those things out and building your scholarship in a way that corrects and extends beyond that. But if it's a different way of looking at something, maybe you have a different theory or framework, maybe you have a different paradigm, a different way of looking at this problem. And so you largely agree 90% of what it is that they're doing, but this 10% is the thing that you want to address. Well, then there's no sense in you just burning down the entire house in order for you to make your argument. You can be respectful and additive instead of being combative and dismissive towards other people. So that being said, I'd like to talk about 5 different ways that you can address other people's work as you're writing your own. The first one and the most basic is just summarization. I would say that summarization in and of itself is not something that you should be doing even in your literature review. No one wants to read just a summary of things. Certainly no one wants to read a summary where every paragraph is just a summary of another article. You have article 1, summary, article 2, next paragraph, summary, article 3, next paragraph, summary. It's unhelpful and frankly boring writing. But in the course of you doing other types of writing styles, which we'll talk about here in a few minutes, you will inevitably have to summarize other people's work. You'll need to be able to read all of what it is that they're doing and either paraphrase closely or summarize broadly things that they're up to in their own work. And so you need to be able to do that summarization work in a way that establishes your credibility, right? You're not looking to be exhaustive. You don't need to map out every methodological or design choice, outlet that it's in, all that sorts of stuff. You just need to be able to get at the heart of what is important in that writing. And if you go back to some of my previous episodes, I have some pointers on how to identify that stuff. But what you're really trying to do here is you're trying to summarize what's going on across multiple articles. So that way you can show that you are conversant and have a command of most of the literature that's going to be in that area. So this sort of summarization process is really sort of identifying dominant trends in the literature, whether that's methodological or theoretical or whatever it might be, and really kind of showing sort of broad strokes, what most scholars either agree on or disagree on. Again, what you should not be doing is doing like an annotated bibliography style or a laundry list style of literature review, and you shouldn't be summarizing things piecemeal. Instead, you're trying to summarize across multiple articles and through that synthesize across them. Most of the time, this is not going to be enough to carry even a literature review, because at the end of the day, a literature review is an argument that is going to help produce the research question, hypotheses, purpose, the gap in the literature, whatever it is that you're trying to get at, it needs to build up to that thing. It needs to show that. And summary by itself is not going to do that. But it is important for you to have a command of summary. If you can't summarize a single article or across multiple articles, then you definitely shouldn't be trying to make arguments or pick fights with other people if you don't even have these sort of basic skills that are needed for you to be able to have a command of the literature. The second approach to building on other people's scholarship is to think of it, I oftentimes talk about on this podcast, as a conversation. So you're entering into a dialogue with other people, and you're going to be going beyond just summarization. Again, summarization is important. If you've ever been in any sort of conflict mediation or conflict management class as a communication studies scholar, I've taught and been in those classes. One of the most important things that you can do in any argument is to be able to recite back what the other person's grievance is in their own language. If someone makes a statement and you disagree with them and you wildly mischaracterize their position, then they in turn are going to get angry at you. They're going to say something bad. You're going to say something bad back. Now, all of a sudden, the argument's not even about the original thing, right? It's just about all the bad blood and recriminations that have happened afterwards. So it's important to be able to summarize, but here we want to go beyond that. We want to think of our writing as having a conversation with other people. So how do we do that? Well, one way that we can do that is to think of, as we're reading the work that we have, we should be grouping people into camps of different scholars about this idea according to what types of ideas or theories or methods they've deployed vis-a-vis the thing that we're trying to study. So if we're interested in the best ways of conflict mediation, well, there's some people who say that this framework is the best way to do it. Other people say it's this other framework. Some people say it's this third framework. So now we have these 3 distinct camps, And so our literature review needs to reflect that and show how these three different camps are or are not interacting with one another, and how we, as the author, are going to be interacting with these three camps. What you can't do is go, well, I really just agree with camp one, so I'm just going to ignore the other two camps. I'm just not even going to address them. That's not your due diligence. You also can't go, I really like Camp one's perspective. Camp two and camp three are a bunch of idiots, and I'm just going to write that into my prose. Unless the other people in those camps are some fringe conspiracy theorists, we can neither ignore them nor vilify them. Instead, we have to approach them in good faith and think of this conversation as not just a conversation that we're having in the writing right now, but the one that we might be having for years or even decades to come. If you think of these people as being in a conversation, then you would never, if you were face to face with them, I would hope, say something to them that would be so offensive that they would never want to talk to you again. But oftentimes people do that in their writing because there's this sense of superiority and distanciation from that allows people to do that. But that's not the ethic that we should have whenever we're in our writing. It's important then whenever you're engaged in this type of writing style that you are not just reporting on the conversation, but instead you are an active participant, right? You're taking sides, you are making judgments, you are staking your claim in this discussion that's been going on. And again, you don't have to be a jerk about it, but you do have a perspective. And so you're going to be bringing that into your writing, and you want to make sure that you are being even-handed in your treatment to others, while also at the same time showing why you think the way that you've gone about this is the best way of doing so. The third way that you might approach your writing style is one of verification. This is particularly true if you're doing like a replication study. The way that you're approaching other people's writing is to say, here's what other people have done, and I'm going to test this because we have new information that might bring previous findings into question. We have a new theoretical model or a new method that might help us do something better, that might help us get new answers to this. But there's something that's gone on that demands that we revisit this question and then verify, right? So if this is the case, right, your contribution oftentimes is going to be much more methodologically focused. You're not really as interested in reporting all of the things that people found in their studies, unless, of course, those findings are somehow being called into question because of a faulty method that was deployed before. It's one thing to say, we're going to test this because this new method allows us to be more precise. It's another thing to say, these people deployed a method erroneously, or they did something to cook the data, and so we're testing this because we don't trust them. So if it's the former, if it's about introducing more precision, you're probably not going to write so much about the findings, because you're not saying that the findings are in question. You're saying that those findings can be made more precise through your new method. But if it's the latter one, right, where you're calling into question other people's findings based on the method, then that would be a place where you might do that. You might see this in like medical research, where if someone doesn't do their method correctly, then it's not just about the findings being erroneous, but now the medical practices based on those findings need to be revised. People might be getting inadequate care, might even be harmed by the faulty method that was deployed before. So in that case, it's very important that you revisit those findings in addition to the method to really make the argument about why it's important that we correct this. But in either case, you're not trying to make the claim that you're doing something new and exciting. Instead, you're bringing us back to what we thought a previously established answer to a question, and then showing us that perhaps we need to revisit that question, that there's something that's gone on that has called what we thought was settled science or settled argument into question and open for us to verify. The fourth way that a lot of people, I think, approach writing, and I think is one that I would recommend 99 times out of 100, is that you language how you're writing as an extension, which is to say, you're not calling people into question. You're not saying that other people are wrong or stupid. Instead, you're saying, here's what they've done. I'm going to build this in this new direction. That can be, I'm building in a new direction. I'm building in a different direction. I'm building in a direction that perhaps they didn't see, but that I see as natural. And so I'm going to be pursuing that avenue. But what you don't have to do necessarily is say, these people were all wrong and stupid, and so now I'm going to come in and correct them. I recently reviewed a piece where it was exactly that, and The author's sitting there and saying, these people made these choices in the 80s and 90s about how to set up these programs, and they built these programs in such a way that was convenient for them, but it's really built this foundation. It's been terrible for the rest of us. These people were morally wrong and repugnant for having made these choices. And you're like, look, man, I don't know these people. Some of them are still around. Most of them are retired. Some of them are dead. I can't ask them what their motivations are. In fact, it's not really that important what their motivations are. This is the hand that we've been dealt. So let's just address can we build a better mousetrap here rather than relitigating some fight happened 40 years ago in the discipline. No one cares. Certainly John Q. Public doesn't care. And even most of the readers of this outlet don't care. So there's no sense in really going after people. Instead, it's much better, I think, as an ethic to look at this and go, hey, these people did what they thought was right at that time. Now, with the benefit of hindsight, we can see maybe not so great. Here's how we build in a different direction. Here's how we can chart a different path than what we had before. Instead of saying these people were stupid or wrong or immoral for these choices, because the choice that they made were not inherently on their face just evil choices. Instead, we can go, hey, they were responding to a situation. They thought that route A was the best way to go. They were wrong. Look at that. I mean, sometimes even scholars, even academics can be wrong. Who knew? So instead of publicly flogging the reputations of these people, let's just keep this in the language of extending things. And so anytime that you have new populations, new contexts, maybe it's a study design, like maybe you're doing longitudinal work rather than cross-sectional, instead of couching that as so many of the studies have been done with this population and everyone's wrong for having to do that. Why weren't they looking at this other population? Well, there's probably a lot of reasons why. Some of those reasons are good, some of those reasons are bad, but there's no sense in couching that as a corrective. You can instead couch that as, hey, there's a whole bunch of scholarship that's been about this particular population, but we don't know anything about this other population. Let's extend our work and findings and know more about this new population. That is much more invitational. It's much more likely to be read and cited than you picking a fight with people and acting as if everyone else is wrong and immoral because they're not interested in the same things that you are. So the final way, I would say, is correction, right? There are some times whenever you do need to correct other people's work. Again, I would say that the vast majority of your scholarship should not be written in this tone. Most of it will be in the first four. And I would say your best bets, unless you're doing something very specific, your best writing tones should be conversational and extension. Verification, if your study design is consistent with that, summary throughout. So really the vast majority of your writing should be done in conversational or extension types of writing. But every once in a while, you do need to have a correction in order to make your contribution. So what are some reasons that you might do that? Well, theoretically, what you might find is that the theory that is being deployed by someone is leading them down a particular route that, because of its boundary conditions, makes it impossible for them to see alternative explanations for the dynamic that they're studying. And so as a result, you're coming into this with the idea that the theoretical model that you are using or that you're proposing does something to correct for that deficit. And so whether that's more of a scientific approach where the boundary conditions of the theory make it impossible to come up with these alternative explanations, or if it's more humanistic where a particular type of philosophy or outlook provides certain answers that are consistent with that framework, but they don't account for dynamics that your philosophical framework can, those would be instances where a correction might be necessary. Another reason would be methodological issues. If there's issues with the way that they're measuring things, maybe they're not using the correct measures, maybe there's been study design flaws like low sampling, maybe there's more nefarious work like p-hacking, right? There are reasons methodologically that you might take a more corrective stance on things and pointing out how another person's methodological flaws have led the community of scholarship down a path that is not supported by the type of work that needs to be done in this area. The third way that you might offer a corrective is by context. So if there are types of dynamics or settings or backgrounds in which a phenomenon is occurring, and traditional scholarship in that area has focused on only one of those or a few of those and has excluded other types of contexts, specifically those contexts that might call into question the findings of this more limited context group, that would be a reason again for a more corrective tone. If it's just a thing of there has been work done in this area, but it has not reached this context, I would use a more extension sort of tone in my writing. But if the scholarship has proceeded in a way, certain populations or contexts or things are being excluded because to include them would be to call this sort of canon into question, that's a problem, right? The whole point of scholarship is that as academics, we are able to read and question each other's stuff in order for us to make sure that we are coming up with the best answers to the problems that face us as a society and as a species. If things are being intentionally excluded in order to confirm these pre-existing ideas or pre-existing findings, that's bad science. That's bad scholarship, right? That needs to be called into question. It needs to be addressed through a more corrective type of language. Even whenever you're engaging in corrective types of writing, though, I would say it's important for you to be respectful and precise and evidence-based. And I think the way that that is done well is if whenever you're offering a corrective to other people's work, you should be citing them heavily, giving as many verbatim quotes as possible, and showing precisely where your contentions are in their work. There are few things worse to me than someone adopting a corrective tone, and yet whenever they show the quote-unquote other side that they're correcting, it's usually very poor paraphrasing or summarization of other people's work if it appears really at all. It's not very well read. There's not very heavy citation in it. It doesn't look like they've done the work for them to be able to summarize, to go back to that first point, to be able to adequately summarize that other person's point of view in a way that that other person would agree, you've done a good job representing my work. Instead, the other person's work, or the other camps of work, depending on how big it is sort of constructed as this straw person that's very easy to knock down. That's not good scholarship either, right? It's your job, if you're going to correct someone, to be able to really show that you know exactly what it is that you have a contention with and exactly what you think your solve is for that contention. I would say it is very rare that you are going to take a single scholar or an entire body of work to task and really show here's all the things that they've done that are stupid and dumb and needs to be thrown out. I mean, if it was that bad, probably wouldn't have been published in the first place, right? So recognizing that there's some level of professional respect that needs to be shown here, even as you are disagreeing with someone, it's important that you are summarizing their work correctly. Again, I would say use direct and verbatim quotes to really show that you are letting them speak in their own voice. Then comes time for you to offer the corrective. Overall, I think that one of the things that I learned in grad school, and it didn't really leave me for a long time, was how easy and honestly how enjoyable it is to sit down on my computer, read a whole bunch of stuff, and then just go to town showing how much smarter and better that I was than everyone else and critiquing everyone else's work and really being in this place where I thought that I knew everything. I think that our doctoral programs, especially in the humanities, really promotes this type of thinking. And on some level, it is a good way of thinking. It's important for you to be able to identify gaps in the literature. You get better at that by practicing. And sometimes, that's going to produce either a type of person or personality, or maybe just a phase in your life where you're like, hey, I'm kind of hot stuff. And so I'm going to show everyone how smart I am by leveraging myself over and above all these other previous writers. But if you look at the literature and you read through a lot of scholarship that's out there, what you find is that there are not a whole bunch of articles out there where people position themselves as a sort of Promethean firebringer to the rest of us. There are some, and there are some that don't, but still are that type of level of, oh my gosh, this changed the paradigm of our thinking on this certain thing. But the vast majority of scholarship is not that. The vast majority of scholarship is incremental. It is showing this small, manageable gap that can be addressed in the 20, 25, 30 pages that you've got. And it's about the slow process of moving our scholarship forward at a very slow pace. It's very deliberate, and that's on purpose. It's because good scholarship, good science, good knowledge is acquired slowly. Wisdom is acquired slowly. I think it's important then, if you're a doctoral student, master's student, or maybe you're an early career scholar, or anyone else, right? If you still have this sort of approach to scholarship of, I'm going to show why everyone else is wrong, I think that that's probably not going to do you very well. You're going to find it's very difficult to get published, or if you are going to get published, it's probably going to be in lesser known journals. And it's not because your ideas are not good, but it's because you're couching them in a very antagonistic and frankly unproductive way. 99 times out of 100, you can couch what you're doing as an extension to other people's work rather than as a corrective. It's very rare that things have gone unchallenged for so long that it requires a corrective writing style. It's possible, but it's likely than adopting that more extension-based type or conversation type of writing style. And I think that you'll find that if you start adopting a more conversation or extension style of writing, you're going to find that your reviewers are a little bit less testy with you, and you're going to find that it's going to be a little bit easier for you to get your work out there, because if we think of this whole enterprise as an ongoing scholarly discussion, then no one wants to have a discussion with the person who is a loudmouth and a braggart and thinks they're smarter than everyone else. If you interacted with that person at the party, you'd be gnawing at your leg like a fox in a trap trying to get away from them. So don't be that person here in your writing. Just because it's written doesn't mean it's not any less personal to the people who have also written in this space. And I think you're going to find yourself in a better headspace, a better mental state, and also more successful if you adopt a better approach to your writing style. That's going to about wrap it up for me, folks. I appreciate you all listening. It's a new year, and I'm interested to know what types of goals that you have for your writing. So my contact information is in the episode description. By all means, reach out to me. Let me know. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Shoot me an email. Let me know what are things you want to accomplish this year. What are episodes that you think that I can do that might be helpful for you? I'm always interested in knowing about your all's problems, because I want to make this podcast the best that it can be. I don't monetize this podcast. I'm not hawking any wares. I'm not selling really anything other than if you want some coaching services, you can do that. But honestly, I do this because I just want to see people be better writers and find more joy in the process of research. And so if there's anything that I can do to help you find that joy, to be more successful, to be the type of scholar that you want to be, then I'm happy to do that. So reach out to me. And if you want me to, I can give you a shout out on the podcast as the person who gave me the idea, or not. Now, you can stay anonymized. Either way, it's up to you. But I do appreciate you listening. And as always, I want to make sure that you're doing the type of work that brings you joy, and that you're writing things that will get into the hands of the people who will want to read it, who will want to cite it, and who will share it with others. Okay? So thank you so much, and I will see you in next week's episode. Hey, co-authors. What's stopping your best ideas from becoming your next big publication? Brilliant research shouldn't die in your drafts folder. Now's the time to bridge the gap between the possible and the published. You can support this podcast by subscribing to it, leaving a positive review, assigning it to your classes, or sharing it with a colleague. Let me know what I can do to make this the best podcast resource for you. And if you'd like to know more about my writing coach services, then you can find my information in the podcast description and set up an appointment. I'll be back next week with another episode. But until then, keep healthy, keep writing, and don't let reviewer 2 get you down.